Maid's daughter slept beside a shivering child. A promise altered her life. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. In a grand mansion tucked away on a sprawling estate, surrounded by immaculate gardens and marble hallways, there lived a family that appeared to have it all. The world admired their wealth, their power, and their unshakable status. But for all their riches, they lacked something essential: love. The warmth that comes from genuine connection, the kind of love that binds people together, was simply absent. Nursery, she saw him, curled up in his bed, pale and shivering under the heavy blankets. Her heart ached as she watched him suffer, unable to find comfort in the warm surroundings of his room. Without thinking, Emily moved to his side, pulling the blankets up around him more snugly. She sat beside his bed, her small frame offering what little warmth she could. Nicholas looked up at her with wide eyes, his voice trembling. "Emily, are you cold too?" he asked. Emily smiled softly and shook her head. "I'm fine, Nicholas," she whispered. "You need to sleep and get better. I'll stay here until you do." She didn't have the luxury of a warm home, but tonight, she had something more precious to offer: a promise. She promised to stay by his side, to protect him, to keep him safe from the cold. As she sat beside him, she made a vow to herself. She would not leave him. She would stay as long as it took. And in that moment, surrounded by the cold walls of the mansion, a simple promise altered both their lives. Emily, who had been invisible for so long, became someone who was needed, someone whose love and compassion mattered. It was the first time in her life that she truly felt seen. And for Nicholas, it was the beginning of a bond that would shape both their futures in ways neither could have imagined. The next morning, when the sun finally broke through the heavy clouds, Emily was still sitting at Nicholas's bedside. She hadn't moved all night, her back stiff and her legs aching, but her heart was full of purpose. Nicholas, though still pale and feverish, had managed to drift off to a peaceful sleep for the first time in days. The warmth of her body and the comfort of her presence had worked wonders, and now, she just needed to keep him safe until his parents noticed. But as the house began to stir with the usual morning routine, no one came to check on the child. The housekeeper passed by the door without a second glance, and the parents were nowhere to be seen. Emily had learned long ago to stay quiet, invisible to the world around her. But this time, something was different. She couldn't ignore the weight of her promise to Nicholas. She gently stroked his hair, whispering a comforting word as she watched him sleep. As the morning light grew stronger, she was reminded of the cold emptiness that lingered in the mansion, a place full of grandeur but lacking in love and warmth. It was the kind of place where wealth was seen as the only measure of success, and love was a luxury few could afford. But as Emily looked down at Nicholas, she realized something. He wasn't like his parents. He didn't ask for the world. He only wanted to feel loved, to feel safe. And in that moment, Emily vowed that no matter how hard it would be, she would do everything in her power to be there for him. Nicholas slowly woke up, his eyes fluttering open, and when he saw Emily still sitting beside him, his face broke into a small, tired smile. "Thank you, Emily," he whispered hoarsely, his voice barely audible. She smiled back, brushing the sweat from his forehead. "You're welcome, Nicholas. Just rest now." Emily knew that she couldn't keep him safe forever in this cold, sterile mansion, but she could offer him something more valuable than riches: her loyalty and her care. As the day went on, Emily stayed close by, watching over him. She brought him water, fed him soup, and made sure he had everything he needed. It wasn't much, but it was all she could do. And though no one else in the house seemed to care, Emily knew that her presence mattered to Nicholas. She was the one person who truly saw him, the one person who didn't look at him as just another spoiled child, but as someone worthy of love and protection. By the afternoon, when the doctor finally arrived, Nicholas was feeling better, though still weak. His parents came into the room, their eyes filled with surprise. They hadn't expected their son to improve so quickly. They turned to Emily, who was standing quietly in the corner of the room, and for the first time, they acknowledged her presence. The mother, who had once barely noticed Emily, looked at her with a new respect. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice lacking the usual sharpness. "You've done more for my son than we have in the past week." Emily simply nodded, not knowing what to say. But deep inside, she felt something stir. For the first time, she realized that maybe her role in this grand house was more than just being invisible. Maybe she could make a difference, even in the smallest of ways. That night, as she lay in her small room, Emily thought about the day's events. She had kept her promise to Nicholas, and in doing so, she had changed something inside of herself. She had been a part of something bigger than herself, something that wasn't defined by wealth or status. It was defined by care, by kindness, and by the unspoken bond between two people who needed each other. Emily had always been told that she was nothing, that she was meant to stay in the background. But now, she realized that she had the power to change the course of her own life. She wasn't just the maid's daughter anymore. She was someone who could make a real difference. And that realization gave her a sense of hope she had never known before. Emily made a promise to herself that she would never stop caring for Nicholas, that she would always be there for him, even if the rest of the world continued to turn a blind eye. Because in that moment, she knew that love, even in its quietest form, was the most powerful force in the world. As the days passed, Nicholas's health continued to improve, and with each passing hour, the bond between him and Emily grew stronger. She stayed by his side, caring for him with a devotion that even his parents began to notice. Although they had always been preoccupied with their wealth and business dealings, they started to see the value in Emily's quiet presence. One afternoon, after Nicholas had recovered enough to leave his room, he asked Emily if she could walk with him through the estate's vast gardens. It was a request that took her by surprise. She had always been told to remain in the background, never to take part in the luxurious activities of the family. But this time, something in Nicholas's voice made her believe it was different. He wasn't asking because she was a servant. He was asking because he genuinely wanted her there. They walked side by side, the chill of the early winter air biting at their skin. Nicholas, though still fragile, smiled as they made their way down the gravel path, surrounded by towering trees that stood like silent guardians over the property. Emily felt an unfamiliar sense of peace as they walked, the rhythm of their steps creating a gentle harmony. As they reached a small pond, Nicholas stopped and looked out at the water. "Do you think the trees know how lucky they are?" he asked, his voice thoughtful. Emily chuckled softly. "What do you mean?" "Well, they have everything they need," Nicholas said, gazing up at the tall trunks. "The earth gives them what they need, and they stand tall without anyone telling them what to do. They don't have to worry about what they're supposed to become. They just grow." Emily nodded, touched by his words. She had never thought about it that way. "Maybe they do," she said softly. Nicholas turned to her, his eyes serious. "I think you're like the trees, Emily." Her heart skipped a beat. "How so?" "You've always been here, always helping, always doing what's right, even when no one notices. You don't have to be told what to do. You just do it. And I think you should grow too. You should be more than just the maid's daughter." Emily felt a lump form in her throat. She had never seen herself as anything more than a servant, someone who was meant to be invisible. But in that moment, Nicholas's words planted a seed of hope in her heart. Maybe, just maybe, she could be more. The next few weeks saw even more changes. Emily continued to care for Nicholas, but the dynamics within the household began to shift. His parents, who had once barely acknowledged her, started to see her in a new light. The mother, who had always been too busy with her own affairs, began to notice the way Emily took care of her son. One evening, she approached Emily in the kitchen, her tone less cold than usual. "You've been a great help with Nicholas," she said, her voice lacking the usual sharpness. "Thank you." Emily nodded, unsure of how to respond. But the gratitude in the woman's voice was undeniable. It was the first time she had ever truly been recognized for her efforts. Nicholas's parents didn't say much, but their actions spoke volumes. They started giving Emily more responsibilities, entrusting her with small tasks around the house. It was a silent acknowledgement of her value, and though it was subtle, Emily could feel it. One evening, after dinner, Nicholas approached her with a shy smile. "Emily, I want to thank you," he said, his voice sincere. "You've done more for me than anyone ever has." Emily smiled, her heart swelling with warmth. You don't have to thank me, Nicholas. I'm just doing what I can. But Nicholas shook his head. No, you've changed everything. You've made me feel important, like I matter. I think you're more important than anyone here. Emily's eyes filled with tears at his words. For so long, she had felt invisible, as though she didn't matter. But in that moment, she realized that she did matter. She mattered to Nicholas. She mattered to the people who saw her for who she truly was. And in that quiet realization, she knew that her life, too, could grow into something bigger, something more meaningful. She had planted the seed of hope, and now it was beginning to bloom. As time passed, Emily's relationship with Nicholas deepened, and the changes within the mansion became more evident. She had always been a quiet presence, but now, she was a central figure in Nicholas's life. Her days were filled with small tasks, helping him with his studies, assisting his mother with organizing events, and taking care of his every need. Her once invisible existence had transformed into something meaningful, something that mattered. But the real change came when Nicholas's parents started to pay attention, not just to Emily's efforts, but to her as a person. One evening, as Emily was sitting in the garden, watching Nicholas play with his friends, his mother approached her. It was an unexpected gesture, and Emily couldn't help but feel a twinge of nervousness. Emily, she began, her tone softer than usual, I've been meaning to thank you for everything you've done for Nicholas. Emily looked up, surprised. It's nothing, ma'am, she replied, feeling the weight of her modesty. No, the woman insisted. It's more than nothing. You've made a real difference in our son's life. He's happier, more confident. And it's because of you. Emily's heart swelled at the words, but she didn't know how to respond. She had never expected this kind of acknowledgement. Her entire life had been spent in the shadows, and now, for the first time, someone was recognizing her for who she was. The woman continued, I can see how much you care for him, and I can't express enough how grateful we are. Emily smiled faintly, feeling a warmth in her chest that she had never felt before. It was the warmth of recognition, of being seen. But as the evening progressed, a new challenge arose. The house, though full of grandeur, was still divided by the invisible walls of class and power. Emily's new position in the household, though improved, still had its limits. The servants continued to treat her with the same distance they always had, and the family's wealth was still a glaring reminder of the difference between them. One afternoon, as Emily was cleaning the library, she overheard a conversation between Nicholas's father and a business associate. Their voices were low, but Emily, ever observant, couldn't help but overhear. She's just the maid's daughter, the businessman said, his tone dripping with condescension. You really shouldn't be giving her too much attention. She's not one of us. Emily froze, the words cutting through her like a cold wind. She had worked so hard to prove herself, to show that she could be more than just the help. But in that moment, she realized that no matter how much she cared for Nicholas or how much he needed her, she would always be viewed as less than. That night, as Emily lay in her small room, her mind raced. She had always known that the world saw her as inferior, but hearing those words from someone so close to the family stung in a way she hadn't expected. She had done everything she could to care for Nicholas, to be there for him when no one else was. But was it enough? Was she truly making a difference? Or was she just a temporary solution to a deeper problem? As the days passed, Emily began to question her place in the mansion. She had been given more responsibilities, more recognition, but the walls of class were still very much in place. Nicholas's parents may have seen her differently, but would they ever truly accept her? Would they ever truly see her as part of their world? The weight of these questions began to press down on her, but she refused to let it stop her. She had made a promise to Nicholas, and she would keep it. No matter what the world thought of her, she would always be there. For him. She would continue to care for him, to protect him, and to love him, even if the rest of the world refused to acknowledge her. Emily had come to realize that she didn't need anyone else's approval to make a difference. She had already changed Nicholas's life, and that was all that mattered. As the weeks continued to pass, the atmosphere in the mansion started to shift. Emily's bond with Nicholas grew deeper, and the subtle changes in her relationship with his parents became more apparent. Despite the challenges she faced as a maid's daughter in a household full of wealth and power, Emily found herself at the center of Nicholas's world, and for the first time in her life, she felt seen. However, The tension between her desire to be part of Nicholas's world and the realities of her social status grew stronger. One evening, as Emily was sitting in the kitchen, preparing dinner for Nicholas and his parents, she overheard a conversation between the family's lawyer and Mr. Hill, Nicholas's father. The words she heard were like a sharp sting in her heart. "She's been spending too much time with Nicholas," the lawyer said. "It might be best to remind her of her place. The boy needs proper schooling and company." Emily stood frozen, her hands trembling slightly as she wiped her hands on a dish towel. She had always known that, despite the affection Nicholas had for her, she would never truly be part of their world. The reminder of her place, the place she had always known, was crushing. She was a servant, someone to be tolerated, not someone to be truly valued. That night, as she lay in her small room, Emily couldn't help but feel the weight of the conversation she had overheard. She had come so far, from being a quiet, invisible presence in the house to becoming someone Nicholas relied on. But was it all just an illusion? Could she ever truly belong in the world she had stepped into? Or was she destined to remain on the outside, looking in? Her thoughts were interrupted the next morning when Nicholas knocked gently on her door. He had a bright smile on his face, as he often did when he was excited. "Emily, I have something for you," he said, holding a small, wrapped package in his hands. Emily raised an eyebrow in confusion but accepted the gift. She unwrapped it slowly, revealing a beautiful leather-bound journal. "It's for you," Nicholas said. "I know you love to write. My mom used to write in one just like it. I thought you could have it." Emily's heart swelled with emotion as she looked at the gift. She had never expected anything like this from Nicholas, and yet here he was, offering her something so personal. "Thank you, Nicholas," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Nicholas smiled, clearly pleased by her reaction. "I want you to know that I think you're important, Emily," he said. "You've done so much for me, and I don't want you to feel like you don't matter. You do." His words meant more to her than anything else. She had always thought that her worth was tied to what she could do for others, but here, in this moment, she realized that her worth came from who she was, and that was enough. The days that followed were a mix of joy and sadness for Emily. She continued to care for Nicholas, but the words of the lawyer and the feeling of being out of place still lingered in the back of her mind. One afternoon, as Emily sat beside Nicholas, helping him with his homework, she made a decision. She would no longer let her worth be defined by the walls of the mansion or the expectations of those around her. She would not allow the judgment of others to dictate her future. She would continue to care for Nicholas, to love him as she had always done, but she would also start living for herself. That night, as she lay in bed, Emily felt a sense of peace that she had never known before. She had a future she would build for herself. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to face it. She knew that, no matter where life took her, she would always have one thing that no one could take away: the love she had for Nicholas and the promise she had made to him. And that, she realized, was worth more than any title, any wealth, or any position in the world. As the days went by, Emily found herself navigating the delicate balance between her growing bond with Nicholas and the invisible barriers that still surrounded her in the mansion. The realization that she had been seen for the first time in her life filled her with hope, but the sting of her place in the world remained. The mansion, though vast and luxurious, still felt like a cage at times. Emily's room was small, a corner of the house hidden from the view of the family, a constant reminder of her position. Yet, despite all this, she had never felt more alive. Her connection with Nicholas had given her a purpose, one that was greater than any title or status. Nicholas, in turn, had begun to change as well. His relationship with Emily had opened something in him that he never realized was missing. He had always been surrounded by wealth, but the affection and care he received from Emily were things no amount of money could buy. One evening, as Emily was helping him with a project for school, Nicholas turned to her with a serious expression. "Emily, I've been thinking," he began, his voice quiet. "You're not just the maid's daughter. You're my friend." Emily smiled, her heart warmed by his words. "I've always been your friend, Nicholas," she said softly. But Nicholas shook his head. "No, you're more than that. You're like family." Emily felt a lump in her throat. For years, she had dreamed of being a part of something bigger, something that wasn't defined by her family's position in society. But here, in this moment, with Nicholas, she realized that perhaps she already was. The days went by, and Emily's role in the house continued to evolve. Nicholas's parents, while still maintaining their distance, began to treat her with more respect. The mother, who had once been cold and indifferent, now sought her advice on small matters. It was subtle, but Emily could feel the shift. One afternoon, as Emily was working in the kitchen, the family gathered in the dining room for a formal dinner. She could hear their voices from the hallway, talking about an upcoming event. It was a charity gala, an important event that would bring together the most influential people in the city. As the conversation turned to the guest list, Emily overheard a familiar name, her own. "Emily will be attending the gala with us," Nicholas's mother said casually. Emily stopped in her tracks. She had been invited to the gala? It was the first time. She had been included in something like this, and for a moment, she couldn't believe it. She had never imagined herself in the same room as the city's elite, let alone at an event where wealth and status were on full display. The thought of attending such a prestigious event both thrilled and terrified her. She wasn't sure if she was ready for it. But as the evening approached, she realized that this was more than just a social event. It was a symbol of how far she had come. She had gone from being invisible, from being a girl who was seen only as the help, to being someone who was invited to the very heart of the world she had once only dreamed of. When the night of the gala finally arrived, Emily stood in front of the mirror in her modest dress. It was simple, not like the extravagant gowns the other women would wear, but it was the best she could afford. She felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. Was she truly ready for this? As the limousine pulled up to the grand venue, Emily's nerves were on edge. The mansion's lights sparkled like stars in the night sky, and the red carpet stretched out before them. She had never been in a place like this, and everything seemed so out of reach. But as she stepped out of the car, Nicholas was there, waiting for her. He smiled at her, offering his arm like they were equals. In that moment, Emily realized something. The gala, the wealth, the status, they didn't matter. What mattered was the connection she had with Nicholas, the bond they had built over the months. He had seen her, truly seen her, and in that moment, that was enough. As they entered the ballroom together, Emily felt a sense of peace wash over her. The glittering lights, the laughter, the voices of the city's most influential people, they all faded into the background. All that mattered was the boy beside her, the boy who had made her feel like she mattered, like she was more than just the maid's daughter. She had kept her promise to him, and in doing so, she had found something far more valuable than any wealth. She had found her own place in the world. As the weeks went by, Emily's life continued to evolve in ways she never imagined. The gala had been a turning point, a symbol of the changes taking place in her life. She had stood side by side with Nicholas, a boy she had once seen only as the son of her employer, but now, he was her friend, her family. That night, as the lights of the ballroom twinkled around her, Emily realized that she had a place in the world, not just as a maid's daughter, but as a person with worth, someone who could stand among the city's elite. But the real test was yet to come. The mansion, with all its grandeur, still held the invisible walls that separated Emily from the rest of the family. Despite the respect she had earned from Nicholas's parents, there were still moments when she felt like an outsider. One day, as Emily was walking through the estate, she overheard a conversation between Nicholas's father and a few of his colleagues. They spoke of a new business deal, one that would require Nicholas to attend an exclusive summer camp for the children of high-profile executives. "He needs to be around the right people," Mr. Hill said. "The camp will be perfect for him. He'll be surrounded by people who understand what it takes to succeed." Emily listened, her heart sinking. She had heard about the camp before, a place for the wealthy to send their children to learn the ways of the elite. She had always assumed that she would never be a part of such a world. The thought of Nicholas being surrounded by people like that made her feel small, like a shadow in a world of bright lights. But then, as she turned to walk away, she heard Nicholas's voice. "I don't want to go," he said, his tone firm. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected him to say that. "Why not?" Mr. Hill asked, clearly surprised. "Because I don't need to be surrounded by people who care about their money more than the people around them," Nicholas replied. "I care about people who are kind, who care about others." Emily stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat. She had always known that Nicholas was different from his parents, but hearing him say those words filled her with hope. It was a reminder that the values she had always believed in, kindness, loyalty, and love, were not things that came with money or status. They were things that came from the heart. Over the following weeks, Emily continued to care for Nicholas with the same dedication and love that she always had. She helped him with his studies, listened to his problems, and spent time with him when he needed someone to talk to. And in return, Nicholas continued to grow more confident in himself, more sure of who he was. But it wasn't just Nicholas who was changing. Emily herself began to realize that she didn't need to be defined by the walls of the mansion or by the expectations of the people around her. She was not just the maid's daughter. She was someone with dreams, with goals, and with the ability to make a difference. One afternoon, as she sat in the garden with Nicholas, she felt a sense of clarity. The path ahead of her was still uncertain, but for the first time, she felt like she had the power to shape it. "Emily," Nicholas said suddenly, breaking her thoughts, "I'm glad you're here." His words were simple, but they meant everything to her. She had always wondered if she truly belonged in this world, if she could ever fit into a place that seemed so far beyond her reach. But now, standing beside Nicholas, she realized that she did belong. Not because of where she came from or what others thought of her, but because of who she was and what she brought to the world. It was a lesson that she would carry with her for the rest of her life. As the seasons changed and time moved on, Emily's life continued to evolve. She didn't know what the future held, but she was no longer afraid. She had found her place in the world, not as someone who was meant to be invisible, but as someone who could make a difference, someone who mattered. And that was enough. With Nicholas by her side, and the promise she had made to him in her heart, Emily knew that anything was possible. As the months passed, Emily's life continued to change in ways she never could have imagined. The mansion, once a symbol of her limitations, had become a place where she was seen for who she truly was, a person of value, not defined by her status, but by her actions, kindness, and heart. Nicholas, too, had grown into a young man with an awareness beyond his years. He no longer saw the world through the narrow lens of wealth and privilege. He understood the importance of compassion, of standing up for what was right, and of valuing people for who they were, not for what they had. But as Emily's place in the mansion grew more secure, the outside world remained indifferent to her transformation. One day, as Emily was tending to the garden, her mother came to visit, bringing with her the familiar warmth and comfort of home. They sat on the stone bench, exchanging stories, with Emily's mother noticing the change in her daughter's demeanor. "You look different, Emily," she said softly. "You've grown stronger, more confident. I can see it in your eyes." Emily smiled, her heart full. "I have, Mom. I'm not just the maid's daughter anymore. I'm more than that." Her mother's face softened with pride. "I always knew you had it in you," she said. "But don't forget where you came from. Remember that your worth isn't defined by the walls of this house, no matter how grand they may be." Emily nodded, taking her mother's words to heart. She had learned that her worth wasn't tied to the mansion or the wealth of those around her. It was tied to the love and respect she had earned through her actions. But the truth was, there were still challenges ahead. Despite all the progress, there were moments when Emily felt like she was still walking on a tightrope. One afternoon, as Emily was in the library with Nicholas, helping him with a history project, the door opened unexpectedly, and Nicholas's father stepped in. His gaze shifted between Emily and Nicholas, a subtle tension in the air. "Nicholas," he began, his voice cool. "Have you finished your project yet? You know how important this is." Nicholas nodded but then looked up at his father, his voice steady. "I'm almost done, Dad. Emily's been helping me." Mr. Hill's eyes flicked to Emily, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something. Disapproval, perhaps, but it quickly faded. "Good," he said with a nod. "Keep working hard, Nicholas. You're a reflection of this family. You can't forget that." The words hung in the air, and Emily felt a chill run through her. She knew she wasn't part of the family, not in the way they saw themselves. But for a moment, she had felt something she couldn't quite place. It wasn't acceptance, but it was close. It was a shift, a sign that things were slowly changing. As the day ended, Nicholas turned to Emily with a look of determination in his eyes. "I don't care what my dad says," he said firmly. "I think you're important, and I'm not going to let anyone make you feel like you're not." Emily's heart warmed at his words, and she smiled at him. "Thank you, Nicholas. That means everything to me. The days that followed brought more changes, subtle ones, but real ones. Nicholas's parents, though they maintained their distance, began to rely on Emily more, acknowledging her presence in the house as something valuable. Emily knew that her place was still not secure in their eyes, but she also knew that it didn't matter as much anymore. She had already found her worth, not in the mansion or in the eyes of those who had once looked down on her, but in the love she gave and received. She had made a difference in Nicholas's life, and that was more than enough. One evening, as the sun set behind the mansion, casting a warm golden glow across the garden, Emily stood at the window, looking out at the world she had once felt so distant from. The past year had been a journey of growth, of self-discovery, and of love. And as she watched Nicholas play in the distance, she realized something important. She didn't need anyone's approval to know her worth. She had already proven to herself, and to those who mattered, that she was more than just a maid's daughter. She was someone who could change lives, someone who had made a lasting impact on the world around her. And that was the most valuable thing she could ever achieve. The months continued to unfold, and with them, Emily's life began to settle into a new rhythm. The mansion, which had once felt so imposing and foreign, now seemed like a place where she truly belonged. She had found not only her worth but her place in the world, and more importantly, in the heart of Nicholas, the young boy she had cared for all this time. Nicholas had blossomed into a young man, confident and kind, his heart full of empathy and understanding. He no longer saw the world through the lens of wealth and privilege. His experiences with Emily had shaped him into someone who valued people for who they were, not for what they owned. One afternoon, as they sat in the garden, Emily glanced over at Nicholas. He was looking at her with a thoughtful expression, a far cry from the boy she had once cared for, the boy who had only known a world of luxury. "Emily," he said, breaking the peaceful silence, "I've been thinking a lot about everything you've taught me. You've shown me that the most important things in life aren't the things we have, but the people we care about and the things we do for them." Emily smiled, feeling a deep sense of pride in the young man he was becoming. "I'm glad you understand that, Nicholas," she replied softly. "It's the love and kindness we give that truly defines us." Nicholas nodded, and then, after a pause, he looked at her earnestly. "I want you to know something, Emily. You've been more than just a friend to me. You've been a family to me, and you always will be, no matter where life takes us." Emily felt her heart swell with emotion. In that moment, she realized that the bond they shared was deeper than anything she could have ever imagined. It was a connection built on love, trust, and mutual respect. And as long as they had each other, nothing else really mattered. The following weeks brought new challenges. Nicholas's parents, while still not fully accepting of Emily as an equal, continued to show subtle signs of recognition. They had begun to see the value of Emily in their son's life, but the walls of their social status and pride were hard to break. Despite this, Emily had reached a point where she no longer needed their validation. She had already built a life for herself, a life defined by the love she had for Nicholas and the people who mattered to her. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, there was a shift in the air. For the first time, Emily was seated at the table with the family, not in the kitchen, not in the shadows. She wasn't just the maid's daughter anymore. She was part of the conversation, part of the family dynamic. It was a small but significant moment. As the night went on, the conversation turned to the future, and Nicholas's parents spoke of college plans, internships, and opportunities that lay ahead for their son. Nicholas, however, turned to Emily with a smile and said, "I know what I want to do. I want to work in a field that helps others, that makes a difference." His parents exchanged a glance, surprised by his words. "That's a noble goal," his father said, his voice softening for the first time. "But do you know what that means?" Nicholas nodded. "I do. I've learned from the best." He looked at Emily, and she saw the sincerity in his eyes. Emily knew that no matter what the future held, she had done her job. She had guided him with love, teaching him the values that mattered most in life. Nicholas's future was bright, full of promise, and it wasn't just his wealth or status that would get him there. It was his heart. And Emily, the girl who had started as a quiet presence in the background, had played a part in shaping that heart. As the years passed, Emily's life continued to unfold, and though the mansion's walls were still high, they no longer felt so suffocating. She had found her place, not just within the walls of the estate, but in the hearts of those who truly mattered. She had built a life for herself, one that was defined by love, compassion, and the knowledge that she was more than enough. And as she stood at the window, looking out over the estate, she realized that her journey had come full circle. She had been invisible once, but now she was someone who had made a difference, someone who had shaped a life with love. And that was all she needed.